My Years in Waconia by Edith Nagel Eisinger, Chapter 4. In May of 1941, I had the misfortune of having a ruptured ectopic pregnancy. It happened so quickly and was a condition that required immediate surgery. It was real hard on Doctor because he needed my help in the hospital, but there was no way except to have surgery. He got a friend of his, a Dr. Robichaud, to come out, and he brought his anesthetist, and he did the surgery right in our own place. It was a successful operation, and it required rest. I think I had about 2 blood transfusions following surgery, but I recovered quickly. I was young and mended easily. So it wasn't long before I was back at my usual work and really was able to do it. I was so glad that I had survived and that I could be back helping Doctor again. Quite often there was an emergency accident, injury, or illness that required an ambulance. We had an ambulance service in Waconia by the Yetzers, and very often they would call and ask me to go with them, which I did. I remember Leon Gatz was one of the ambulance drivers. He would start out, and if I felt he was going too fast, I would tell him, "We just don't know what we are going to do, but I want to get back alive, so I wish you would slow down a little." And he was very nice and would slow down. He didn't want to scare me. So I guess that was the only thing to do, speak out. But he was a good person. In fact, he was our neighbor for years, and he was a good little friend. He would bring me May baskets when I first lived in Waconia, and he was our paper boy. And here I was, riding with him in the ambulance to pick up somebody that had been hurt, become ill, or whatever happened. We never did have an accident, and always came back all right. And I was glad I had been with the ambulance driver. Sometimes there was something that I could do to alleviate pain, or to help the patient be more comfortable before he or she got to the hospital. When we had a critically ill patient, Doctor liked to stay with that patient all night and stay in the hospital where he could be at the patient's beck and call. It made the patient feel so much better if he knew the doctor was right there. Well, we had this elderly man from St. Bonifacius that was in the hospital. I think he had a heart condition. He was very ill. I think it was around midnight when a relative of his, I think it was the man's daughter, became very, very ill. And of course, I knew her history and knew what she needed to help her. He said I had to leave this patient, and I asked, why can't I go to St. Bonifacius and give this medication that was given hypodermically? So he said I could go. It was a real cold night, and we had lots of snow. I think it was about 20 below zero. St. Bonifacius was about 4 miles from Waconia. I started out and took what I thought was going to be a shortcut, and I should have never done that. I was a short way into this shortcut when I got stuck. 20 below zero and about 2 o'clock in the morning. Maybe a little bit before that, but it was after midnight. Anyway, here I was stuck in this snowbank. I didn't dare get out and walk because the snow was too deep and it was too cold. And I just never dared to start out. And I didn't like to run the motor on the car because I was afraid of carbon monoxide. So I just waited and waited and waited. About 6 o'clock, the patient's son-in-law came to the hospital. Doctor asked if they got along okay and if the patient over there was feeling better. The son-in-law said I had never arrived in St. Bonifacius. Of course, then everybody was a little worried and wondering where I was. So this man, Mr. Claypot, said, "I know where she is. She's on that road, that shortcut we take in the summertime." It wasn't long, about 6 o'clock. I think I was in the snowbank from about 2 a.m. to about 6 a.m. when a wrecker and a couple of men came and rescued me. It worked out all right. They pulled the car out. That was about the last time I went out at night. I was mighty happy to be back home and really get warmed up again. I was cold, and I took a hot bath and went to bed and slept. I was none the worse for the ordeal. Everything was all right. The patient, I'm sure, was very thankful to have Doctor stay there all night, even though I think a few days later he passed away. He was about 90 years old, and we really were expecting him to die, but he appreciated having his doctor right by his bedside. All the x-ray equipment had been moved from Doctor's office over to the hospital. We had a room in the basement where we could have our X-ray equipment. I did all his X-ray work and EKGs and metabolism tests. That X-ray was used very often. We had a veterinarian in the town that didn't have his own X-ray equipment, and one day he called to see if I would be able to X-ray a dog they thought had swallowed something. They thought it was needles, and they wanted to see. Of course, the people were very anxious to save their dog. I told Vet that if you can sedate him real well so he'll be very quiet and wrap him up in a sheet and bring him in the back basement entrance, I would be glad to X-ray him. So he did, and the dog was very quiet. We quickly X-rayed him, and I gave the vet the X-ray picture, and he was very pleased. I said, I don't mind doing a dog, but I don't want to do a horse, so don't bring a horse down here. He left and said he appreciated that I would help him out, and quite often after that, I did help him out by X-raying small animals for him. If I was able to get away, it was usually on a Friday. I would leave about the time I thought Doctor was coming home. We didn't like to leave without one of us being at the house or readily available. I would go into Minneapolis, meet some friends, and have lunch or do some shopping. Have a little part of a day for relaxation. Occasionally, I would see a movie. I was usually back by 5 o'clock in the afternoon, maybe sooner than that in order to have dinner with Doctor. Our only leisure time together was when we had our meals. We had a good housekeeper. She was a good cook, and we enjoyed eating our meals at home. Each Friday after our evening meal, I would go out in the country and pick up 15 dozen eggs. That was a weekly chore of mine to get the eggs from a farmer's place south of Waconia at Cologne. The name was Lemke. Usually I had time for coffee and cake and maybe a little visit. Those Fridays were always the most enjoyable day of the week. Lemke's had one of the most beautiful farms around there. The farm buildings were well kept, and the house was beautiful and very well kept, well groomed. The lawn was beautiful and green, and they spent a lot of time taking care of that. They were always good help to us in many ways. They helped us out financially when we needed it to meet our payroll, and they helped us out financially when we were going to build and add on to the hospital or build the nurses' home. Whenever we needed anything, they were always right there on hand to help us out. They were some of our best friends in Waconia. The Lemkes have since passed away. The farm was sold and taken over by someone else. They have built a big new house on the place, and it is really a lovely home.